If you're in the market for a 7-seat SUV, you probably already know that the Kia Sorento is a very good looking option. We're looking at this one today because it's the brand new parallel or self-charging hybrid version, which we know is the level of electrification that most Australians are ready for. And it makes the Kia Sorento the first car in Australia that's available as a petrol, diesel, plug-in hybrid, and now a parallel self-charging hybrid version. The question is, with the very good and very established Toyota Kluger playing in the segment, should you consider the Kia? We're going to take a closer look, but before we do, remember to check out the full written review over at carsguide.com.au. Over at the EV Guide site section, where you'll also see a review of the plug-in hybrid version of this car and all sorts of advice and stuff if you have any questions about the levels of electrification. Now, we have split this review down into our categories. You'll see them on the screen now. Feel free to skip ahead to the part which interests you. If you're watching on YouTube, they'll be in the timeline or the description below. And while you're there, why not hit the like, subscribe, and bell notification icons to stay up to date with all of our latest content. For now, the hybrid Sorento slots into the range above the top spec diesel all-wheel drive, but below the plug-in hybrid, and it's only available in the GT line spec level. That having been said, you can have it as either a front or an all-wheel drive. At this price point, the Sorento is at the higher end for a mainstream 7-seat SUV, and its rivals should include the Mazda CX-9 GT, Hyundai Santa Fe Highlander, and of course, what should be its nemesis, the mid-spec Toyota Kluger GXL Hybrid. Value-wise, it's nothing to be scoffed at, offering a hybrid at the same price as its high-spec combustion rivals and a higher trim level than the equivalent Kluger. It is worth noting though that the Kluger is slightly bigger dimensionally, and no doubt many will be convinced by the Toyota badge which sits on its nose. The Sorento's equipment level is awesome though at this GT line grade, with 19-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights, a motorized tailgate, a heavily digitized cabin with a 12.3-inch digital dash and a 10.25-inch multimedia touchscreen, an 8-inch head-up display, a wireless phone charger, Bose branded premium audio, quilted Napa leather interior trim with 14-way power adjust for the driver and 10-way power adjust for the front passenger, heated seats for the first and second row, a panoramic sunroof, LED mood lighting, and even a passenger intercom. You do well to find a better set of standard equipment even in this segment, and the hybrid GT line also gets the full spread of safety gear, which we'll look at later. Now, it's one thing to have all the equipment in the world, but it's quite another to make a big SUV like this look good. And does the Sorento ever look good? To me, this is one of Kia's best ever designs. Up front, the Sorento looks tough and stout with that blacked out grille and angry LED light fittings, as well as an imposing squared off stance. Down the side, the square roofline makes it look squat and sporty, with matte silver detailing adding some intrigue, while the rear features muscle car-like light fittings, accentuating its width, and a spoiler rounding out its tough theme. The interior of the Sorento looks just as good as the outside, with all these intricate patterns working their way through the dash into the vents, and this kind of fish scale pattern here which is laced with ambient LED interior lighting as well. It is really quite a nice design and really steps out of a comfort zone of what you'd expect from a big SUV like this. The digital presence in here, it's not quite as dazzling as it is in some premium cars, but it still does lift the ambience up. I really like it, but is it practical? Let's take a look. Now, thankfully, the Sorento's interior is as big and adjustable and as practical as you would hope an SUV in this class would be. Now, I'm 182 centimeters tall. I've got plenty of headroom there. I've got plenty of arm room. I can rest my elbows on these nice soft points, with the only missing soft point, something to rest my knee on here. That's a bit of a shame, but other than that, really, really great. Now, in terms of storage, you do have a small bottle holder in the door, but not much of a bin in there, which is something that's a bit different, and a large bottle holder in the center console here. There's two of them. They're almost too large for this bottle. It'll actually move around quite a bit while you're driving. And a little bay here, which is great for putting like your keys in or a wallet or something like that. There's also a large flip open bay up the front, 3 USB ports, a wireless charger, and another sort of slot to put your phone in, probably the one that you're going to have connected up because there's no wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. There's only wired versions of those technologies. The center console box is enormous, and you can store heaps of stuff in there as well, and just generally it's really great. You can also move around this passenger seat using the buttons on the side there, so if it's set to a position that you can't used properly or is blocking your vision or something, you can just move it from there without having to reach all the way over, which is kind of a convenient feature for rear passengers or the driver. Now, in terms of interactivity with the systems here, the digital screens are really good. I appreciate the fact that it's got a head-up display as well. Makes it really easy to concentrate on what you're doing while you're driving. This center area here has a fully tactile climate panel, so there's shortcut buttons for everything. There's little dials to adjust temperature and fan speed and such, which is really handy. And the multimedia suite also has 2 dials there with an instant off and shortcut panels down the side as well. My only criticism of this system is that for a driver, it is quite a reach to reach all the way over to the furthest panels over here, which is the only downside really. Other than that, it's really easy to operate. Rear seat space in the Sorento is awesome. I have so much knee room behind my own seating position, although headroom is a little bit more limited than it is in the front seat. So if you're any taller than me, you might notice that. In terms of storage, you have a large bottle holder down there in the door and a second full-size one up here too, which is kind of neat. And the outboard rear seats here are heated and they have ISOFIX points as well, which is really good. There are dual adjustable air vents, a 12-volt outlet and a USB port down there, as well as 2 more USB ports on the backs of the seats, so plenty of amenity for rear passengers. You got pockets here as well, although there isn't an extra climate zone as there is in some other rivals. There's a drop-down armrest here, again with that really nice padding. Seat comfort continues to be excellent as well, and there are more cup holders in here, although again, they're a little bit too big for our little bottle here. There are also these neat shades built in, so you don't have to buy them separately. There we go. Now, in a lot of 7-seaters, the third row is sort of an afterthought because most manufacturers think, well, you're just going to put kids back there anyway, so we don't need to pay too much attention to it, just make it barely passable. But that's not the case in the Sorento here. It's actually really quite good. Again, I'm 182 centimeters tall, and although my knees are kind of brushing this seat in front of me, I've only had to move that forward slightly to fit in here. So you could even go a little bit further forward if you had an adult in front of you and they were willing to be slightly less comfortable. So that's really quite excellent. There's somewhere for my feet to slot in under this seat in front of me, which goes a long way to making it feel bigger. With the major limiting factor, this headroom, that's really the only dimension where I'm feeling like it's a bit more closed in. The seat trim again continues, and these seats back here have ISOFIX points, which is really, really rare. So you get a total of 4 in this car. That's excellent. Now, in terms of amenities, there are even some cool things back here as well. These rearmost passengers really haven't been forgotten. You get a USB port, a full-size bottle holder, and a little bay for shoving things like phones or wallets in, as well as adjustable air vents with their own fan, which genuinely works. Like, I can feel a bit of air pressure coming out of that. That's really, really good. And when it comes to getting out, you've got quick fold buttons back here so you can flip these seats forward quite easily. That's really good. This is probably one of the best third rows in any 7-seat SUV. Boot space is nearly identical to the purely combustion versions of the Sorento, down just 8 litres. See the figures on your screen now. It's impressive the Sorento manages to fit our smallest case with room to spare with all the seats deployed, but boot space is great across the board. Okay, so the best thing about this kind of hybrid is you kind of don't really need to worry about what goes on under the bonnet. It all sort of takes care of itself from behind the wheel. You just need to fill it up with fuel however often, and off you go. When it comes to the details though, this system works slightly differently to the popular Toyota version of this technology. The Sorento pairs a 1.6-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine with power figures you'll see on your screen now, with an electric motor which produces its own set of outputs you'll see here. The combined power output is pretty impressive, but not the most powerful in the segment, and the combination is slightly less powerful than the plug-in hybrid version of the Sorento. Now, Kia's hybrid system does work a little bit differently from the Toyotas that you might have driven before, and that's because Kia places the electric motor between the combustion engine and the transmission, meaning it needs to send its electric drive through that 6-speed gearbox, so it does feel a little bit different from behind the wheel. Lurking under the floor somewhere is a 1 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack which stores the energy that this car regenerates when it slows down. Let's take a look what it's like from behind the wheel. Now, one thing to note straight away is we're driving the front-wheel drive version of the hybrid. There's also an all-wheel drive, which we didn't sample for this test. I also was given the opportunity to drive this car back-to-back with the Toyota Kluger hybrid, so I'm able to comment on how the two compare, which was quite revealing. We'll start with a few general things about the Sorento though, and straight away, this is a lovely big SUV to drive because the visibility is so great. It's got a big windscreen, really great visibility out the rear despite having 7 seats, and it's got huge mirrors and huge side windows as well. So I do feel like I have a great handle on what's going on around me at any given time. Immediately, this car is impressive in terms of its steering and handling and ride as well. The steering is a little bit firmer than what you might expect from something like the Toyota Kluger, but it does give this car a level of engagement that perhaps the Kluger doesn't have. And in terms of its ride as well, it's again firmer than the Kluger, but more engaging as well. So if you do want to enjoy driving your big 7-seat SUV a bit more, that's what this car offers. So in that way, it does kind of live up to the sporty promise sold by its kind of aggressive exterior design, which is kind of nice to see. Now, that stiffer chassis and firmer ride does mean that the Sorento isn't as soft and compliant over some of the bigger bumps and harsher corrugations as its Kluger rival. But then again, it's more engaging, which is something a bit rare for this segment. It also feels a lot lighter and a lot smaller than the Kluger. It is smaller than the Kluger, but not by a huge amount, but behind the wheel there's a really big difference. What you really care about though, that hybrid system, what's it like to drive and how does it compare to Toyota's renowned system, which is present there in the hybrid Kluger? Well, I'm pleased to report that this system is really quite smooth and lovely. It's maybe not as sandpapered as the Kluger, and I think that's due to the fact that that electric drive is sent through a traditional gearbox instead of a continuously variable automatic, which is what the Kluger uses. And that means on occasion there is a time where you can feel a lack of torque when those gears shift. It's especially evident on hills, and interestingly I didn't notice it in the plug-in hybrid version of this car, maybe because the electric motor produces a little bit more power or it's geared differently. I can't really tell you what the answer is there. But this car generally is still very good. I don't think most drivers are going to notice that kind of gear shifting action. It is really only easy to tell what's going on when it's kind of on a steeper incline, so that's worth noting. It's not as polished as the Toyota system, but the motor pulls nice and strong, and if you roll it on softly, the engine won't turn on, and actually you can make the most of that electric drive for a longer period of time. That should make our Sorento quite efficient. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. One area where it is a little different from the Toyotas when it comes to running on pure combustion energy is this 1.6 litre turbocharged engine is not an Atkinson cycle engine, and it's also not a huge non-turbo engine, so the experience is quite a bit more modern than the equivalent Toyotas when you're driving under combustion power, which is nice. Now, just like the Toyotas, when you do hop on that brake, there's an element of blended braking where the electric motor is regenning some of that energy and storing it in that 1 kilowatt-hour battery so you can use it for electric driving at lower speeds. That's quite handy because you don't have to feel like you're wasting that energy slowing down, and it probably saves you a bit on brake pads as well. The electric motor does feel like it has quite a bit more torque than an equivalent Toyota system, but you still have to be careful with your accelerator application to try and make the most of that initial electric power, as if you do push it too far, it will turn the engine on. It is still quite keen to do that. When the engine does turn on, there's a notable drop in refinement because it is a little 1.6 litre that does have to rev quite hard to pull this big SUV. And while there's an element of electrical assistance in there, so it's not just that engine going on its own all the time, you do notice it when it's on. Of course, the digital dash does give you really good feedback for where kind of the limit of your acceleration is. Maybe not as good as the Toyota, which has really clearly defined zones for your accelerator application. And I do feel like the computer in this car does take control sometimes and just turns the combustion motor on for reasons beyond my understanding. But that having been said, you really don't have to put any attention into it at all. The best thing about systems like this, and it goes for the Toyota ones as well, is you can just drive it like a normal car and no matter what, it will save you heaps of fuel. Ultimately then, where does that leave our self-charging Sorento? Well, ultimately it's not quite as sandpaper smooth as the Toyota tech, and it doesn't feel like it has that nice level of electrification that the plug-in hybrid has. However, I do feel like this is probably the ultimate version for someone who doesn't really want to think about it. It's just a brilliant application of hybrid tech in an SUV this big. And it does feel like that motor has plenty of torque, so I feel like in some ways it might actually be better than the Toyota system. Okay, so all the hybrid tech in the world is fantastic, but if it doesn't actually save you fuel, there's no point. And the great thing about this Sorento Hybrid is it's actually producing a better fuel number, according to the dash here, than I got in the Kluger. So in the Kluger, and keep in mind that SUV is bigger than our Sorento here, but not by a whole lot, I was getting about 8 litres to 100 kilometres. But here in the Sorento, the official number is much lower. You'll see that on your screen now. And the number that I've scored on my week with the car is actually 5.7 litres to 100 kilometres. And for an SUV this big to use the same amount of fuel as a small car, that's excellent. Now, when it comes to safety tech, this is a top spec GT line, and that means it comes with the full set of gear. We're not going to bore you with all the details. Make sure to read them over on the full written review at carsguide.com.au, but I will tell you for now that it comes with all the important stuff: high-speed auto emergency braking and all of that gear, with the only thing special about this GT line being that it has a blind spot camera as well as blind spot monitoring. So that means that when you indicate, it'll actually have a little camera in the dash there that lets you see into the lane next to you. And you might think, oh, well, I'm an experienced driver, I don't need that, I'm just going to use my mirrors. That's fair enough, but one cool thing about the camera is it actually points down. So if you're going around a corner that's quite tight and you're not sure if your rear wheel's going to make it without scratching or something, that camera will show you. So I actually found that quite useful on my week with the car.
It is worth noting that the airbags don't quite cover the entire length of the third row, notable if you're going to be frequently using those seats, but all variants of the Sorento qualify for a maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating to a 2020 standard. Kia is famous for its 7-year and unlimited kilometre warranty, which is now being replicated by other challenger brands like MG and Haval in the segment below, both of which have new hybrid models nipping at Kia's heels. There's a matching 7-year cap price servicing program for this car, which to our surprise is actually quite a bit higher than that of the pure combustion variants. See the average service price on your screen now. The Sorento also has to visit a shop slightly more often than expected, with 12 monthly or just 10,000 kilometre intervals.
Hybrids without a plug, like this one here, are at the level of electrification that Australians are most ready for. And this Kia Sorento makes a great argument for the tech, even in an SUV this big. And I think how easy to use it is really speaks for itself when it comes to the price difference between this one and the plug-in hybrid. And while that's a really good car, I think this one is set to be more popular. What do you think? Would you pick this one over a Toyota Kluger? Tell us in the comments below. And remember to check out the full written review at carsguide.com.au.